Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Edie's Susty Talks. These are our short but sweet one-on-one podcast interviews with sustainability and business leaders across the world to keep us all a bit more connected and informed, even if we're pressed for time. You're listening to the voice of Edie's content editor, Sarah George, and I'm joined on the line today by Jack Kidder, who is the responsible business manager at Henry Boot. Thank you so much for your time today, Jack. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
No, thanks for hopping on. And whereabouts are you dialing in from?
So I'm actually currently in Leeds. I'm on the 10th floor of a big city centre office space in Leeds, which is not my normal working location, but I've been very kindly given this space today by our friends at Deloitte, who have accommodated me while I'm in Leeds today. So yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day up here, a little bit windy, but no, it's nice to be in Yorkshire always.
No, fantastic. And hopefully we don't pick up too much of that wind whistling in the background.
Yeah.
So, Jack, I think this is the first time we've spoken, so it would be great to get a little bit of an introduction to your role and your business to start things off.
Yeah, sure. So I work for an organisation called Henry Boot. Henry Boot is a nearly 140-year-old company that specialises across real estate construction and property development. We are headquartered in Sheffield, but we operate across the UK. And effectively what we do is we create places. So our different divisions, whether that's strategic land, construction, property development or house building, we are here to create great places across the UK. And we've got a very long and proud track record of doing that. Whilst environmental sustainability and protection has been something that the business has thought and acted on for a long time, I think we recognise, like lots of other businesses in recent years, that a step change was needed. So I was brought in about 4 years ago, and as responsible business manager, my job at the business is overseeing the delivery of our responsible business strategy, which incorporates all the work we're doing on climate change adaptation. So it's a real pleasure of mine to work with some very talented colleagues in the work we do publicly, but then also it's about looking inward at the business and our own processes and practices and making sure we work hard to really kind of push ourselves to become as sustainable as we possibly can.
Great, thanks for the intro. And we can dive into some of those step changes that are coming in. Something that caught my eye about the strategy is that the company is aiming for net zero controlled emissions by 2030. So what does it take to get in the sectors that you've mentioned? Do you need new technologies, or is it more a case of changing processes?
I think it's probably both, Sarah. So we set our net zero carbon target back in 2021. And, like lots of other businesses, we wanted an aspirational target. But at the same time, we didn't want something that sounded great on paper but wasn't achievable in reality. So we worked with a consultancy called Anthesis, who helped us draft our net zero carbon framework. And in effect, what that's going to see us do is both those things you've said. It's looking at the way we already work and transitioning through investments and more sustainable practices, whether that's how we operate our buildings, whether it's how our employees travel, whether it's how we operate and maintain our fleet. But we recognise that there are some really challenging areas for our industry. And when it comes to directly controlled emissions, a great example, we operate a fleet of heavy goods vehicles through our plant hire business. That's still a very difficult sector to abate emissions from. And we know that without that kind of change in technology and without that willingness to invest in research and development, then it's going to be very, very difficult for our sector to completely decarbonise. So, I think ultimately we know this is still a stretch target, but I think for us, what we are very, very kind of aware of is if you don't take a leap each year to get to that 2030 mark, then it's going to be very challenging towards the end of the 2020s when we are really pushing to cut those residual emissions.
Yeah, I'd argue in my role that I'm seeing that now from businesses that have 2025 goals, so that makes complete sense. And Jack, you mentioned there that there's a need for changes to processes in terms of how you manage buildings and how you operate a fleet, but I'd love to hear about what's been going on with sort of people-related processes since going on. I've heard that this can be a real mindset shift, and some of what you've mentioned will have to touch on different teams, people doing finance, innovation, partnerships. So what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it, Sarah? I'm not a climate scientist, and I would never hold my hands up and claim I am. And when I came into this role nearly 4 years ago, my instinct at the time told me that it was the scientists we really needed on this journey to help us understand And while science absolutely plays a critical part in this, actually what I've learned, one of the key learnings is that every function in our business has a role to play. And you picked up a great example there, which is our finance team. So I work with some very talented colleagues in our finance team who really, I would say, are our heroes in terms of a sustainability journey, because what they're able to do is use data, whether that's through the energy we use, the business mileage our colleagues kind of rack up as they're doing their work, the way we're using our fleet, and they can use that data to help us tell a story and understand where our key impact is. And without them, really, it's quite difficult to actually get the picture of where your hotspots are in terms of that creation of emissions. So we're learning, and it's been a great learning curve for us, is that everybody has got a role to play in sustainability, not just the sustainability manager. This is fairly, it's not actually even been shared widely internally yet, but we've had over the last year or so with us a PhD student from Sheffield Hallam University. And he has joined us as a climate change research assistant. So we commissioned him to undertake some research into how we were storytelling about our climate change adaptation, both within the business and externally. And actually, I think the most valuable thing that he has extracted from his research is that sustainability and changing that mindset means that everybody has to feel part of a shared mission. They have to have a role. And if you as an organisation set a target and inform your people of how it's going, that's great. But unless they have a role to play and understand what their contribution is, then ultimately it feels like it's somebody else's business. It's somebody else's problem to worry about. So a big learning for us is we've set the target. We regularly update our colleagues on progress. But actually the next real kind of game-changing step for us is, how do you then embed within everyone within the business that this is a shared mission? And we've taken some great strides doing that, in the sense that we have employee champions and working groups. We've incorporated sustainability into our learning and development program, but there's a lot more to do. And I think the mindset shift is critical. And what we're about 500 headcount business, so we're not a huge kind of corporate giant. But even in a business like ours, the impact people can have on the ground in the job they're doing is far bigger than the impact I can have alone sat in an office. And what's been really interesting for me is just how interested and excited people are about the challenge. And I think creating it as a shared mission and a shared challenge, and rather than kind of the doom and gloom that I think a lot of us are used to hearing about in the media, you've got to kind of create that sense of excitement and the art of the possible, rather than focus too heavily on the negatives. But we're still fairly early in the journey.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I wonder if what you mentioned there, that sense of storytelling, that excitement, that collaboration also would work well for external collaboration. And my feeling is that it probably would.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one great example of that, we are members of a really good organisation called the Yorkshire Climate Action Coalition. And this is a business network that was set up by Deloitte and Walker Morris about 5 years ago. And this is across Yorkshire and the Humber. And we held an event with them back in February where we were asking the question of education leaders, what's needed to ensure we don't have a green skills deficit in the next 5 to 10 years. And actually, again, going into that, I had the kind of preconceived notion that green skills was a really important term, and we had to think about what courses young people were doing. And actually, the learning that we all took away from that was, actually, everyone needs green skills. There needs to be sustainability embedded in every role. It shouldn't just be climate engineers or sustainability practitioners. Every single role in 10, 15 years will have to be a green role. This is about a kind of fundamental rethinking of the way our economy functions. So that was really interesting. And I think, we operate in an industry where, whilst we've got good links with academia, we haven't really, I think, tapped into the wealth of expertise and knowledge and innovation that's going on across universities in the UK. The chair of our responsible business committee, Serena Lang, recently did a piece about the importance of that collaboration. And I'm so pleased to see her do that, because for us, we're not holding our hands up and saying we're experts at this, but the benefit of collaboration with the businesses with shared values, but actually academic institutions, can be really, really valuable. The flip side of that then is that, actually, as well as looking outwards and at your network, it's also looking at your supply chain. And we know that, again, we operate in an industry that accounts for about 25% of the UK greenhouse gas emissions. Whilst we can manage our chunk of that, actually a huge amount of that is associated with supply chains. So we've got a lot of work to do in partnering with suppliers of all shapes and sizes to work together to, again, fundamentally shift the way we create spaces in the UK.
Yeah, that's all super important stuff. And I'm wondering how much of that you feel that you can get on with without maybe the top-down direction from policy or from bigger businesses. So you mentioned green skills. We all know that the UK skills strategy hasn't been updated since the UK legislated for net zero. So to what extent can businesses continue to stay ahead of the curve and get that done by themselves?
Well, I mean, look, this is so topical at the moment, isn't it, with the election on the agenda? And there's obviously been a lot of change in recent months around green policy. My instinct tells me that whilst obviously businesses have to be aware of government policy, and because of course that sets the tone and direction in terms of funding and things like that, this is not going away. And whether the government is really focused in its ambition or whether it's detracting from its ambition at times, I think businesses almost have to rise above that, and we have to think, why are we doing this? And ultimately, for us at Henry Boot, there's a number of drivers. It's the right thing to do fundamentally. We all live on Earth and we want to protect that. But actually, there's other drivers as well. It's what our people want. It's what our customers want. And, fundamentally, it's really good for business. We are trying to create a sustainable economy. So I think if you can invest in that and tap into that now, it will pay dividends in 30, 40 years for all of your stakeholders. So, whilst it would be foolish to say that businesses shouldn't be aware of political change and political discussion, I think for us, it's about playing the long game and looking towards, the the 2050s to think, where do we want to be as a business? We want to be thriving. We want to be sustainable. And we want to be creating really contemporary spaces in that time. And that means today making positive choices that will impact the way we're able to do that in 30 years. So I hope, in answer to your question, I think we need to rise above short-term thinking and really look to the future. And a big part of that is creating really, really positive collaboration with partners. And it helps us, I think ultimately the kind of customer we want to work with, the kind of shareholders we want to attract are those that will join us in that long-term vision, whilst obviously recognising that it's good for business today and tomorrow.
That's really heartening to hear. And I wanted to touch on something you mentioned. You mentioned that while you wait for political decisions, it can be hard to know what funding's coming or what the bottom line in terms of compliance is going to look like. But I'm sure that it also confuses the general public and staff. So I wanted to get your view on essentially engaging more of the general public with some of the great work that you've mentioned, which sounds really centred around the just transition, around good jobs, around long-term thinking, around placemaking. So what would be your learnings on selling the sustainable business opportunity to the public locally?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it, Sarah? Because if you look at all the sectors across the UK, I think where you see this happening more and more now is retail, or consumer goods. You only have to turn on your TV and watch adverts, and whereas products used to talk about being the best value or the best quality, now they're talking about being sustainable, and that's what they're selling themselves on. But actually, I think it's our industry, the built environment, that possibly has the best opportunity to deliver a fair transition, because ultimately the product we deliver, places, are for everyone. We design spaces and places that everyone uses. So we need to think about how do we not only create places that are beautiful and useful and welcoming, but actually sustainable as well. And in terms of engaging the general public on that, I think there's a lot of alignment for our industry with social value. So as more and more government bodies and local authorities and private clients are asking for social value credentials from the built environment, I think one thing that we can all collectively do is to celebrate actually the really brilliant environmental developments going on across the UK. So, one of the things I'm really proud of is that we are, as a property developer, for instance, we are developing some of the UK's finest net zero carbon buildings, and none of them are in London. And I don't say that with any disrespect to the capital. I love London, but isn't that great that actually across the UK that sustainability is at the forefront of design, and wherever you live, there can be and will be in the future access to these fantastic sustainable spaces.
That's great to hear. And you mentioned social value, which is fascinating and something that I could talk about all day, Jack, but I think we're just about out of time for this particular episode. So thank you so much for sharing all of those learnings with me today.
No, thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to talk to you.